Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. We are back with a glossary of legal terms. The first phrase today is partial judgment. A partial judgment is a court decision resolving some but not all issues in a case. It allows portions of claims to be adjudicated early. Courts may issue them to expedite justice and narrow disputes. Appeals may be restricted until the full case concludes. Partial judgments balance efficiency with fairness. The next phrase is why enforcement action. A why enforcement action is a legal or administrative measure taken to ensure compliance with the obligations under a specific framework. It may involve financial penalties, injunctions, or asset seizures. The why suggests a special category, possibly in corporate or regulatory contexts. Enforcement actions deter violations and uphold the rule of law. Their scope varies from tax law to securities regulations. The next phrase is breach of promise. Breach of promise refers to the failure to fulfill a legally binding promise, often associated with a broken engagements in historical contexts. In modern law, it applies to contractual promises not kept. Remedies may include damages or specific performance. Breach of promise cases emphasize reliance and expectation interests. The scope spans contract law and personal obligations. The next phrase is breach of statutory duty. Breach of statutory duty occurs when a person or entity fails to comply with a legal obligation imposed by statute. Victims may claim damages if the breach causes harm. Courts assess whether the statute intended to confer private rights. It is both a civil wrong and sometimes a criminal offense. The scope lies at the intersection of public regulation and private rights. The next term is descendant. Descendant refers to a person directly related to an ancestor through bloodline, such as children, grandchildren, and further generations. It is a key term in inheritance and family law. Descendants often have rights in succession matters. Courts use the term to determine distribution of estates. Its scope is central to property transfer and genealogical rights. The next term is larceny. Larceny is the unlawful taking and carrying away of someone else's property with the intent to permanently deprive them of it. It is a traditional crime under common law, often equated with a theft. The act requires both a physical taking, that is actus reus, and an intent, that is mens rea. Depending on value, larceny can be classified as petty or grand. Its modern equivalents appear in criminal courts worldwide under theft-related provisions. The next phrase is mandatory rule. A mandatory rule is a legal provision that it cannot be waived or altered by agreement between parties. It overrides private agreements to protect a public order, fairness, or weaker parties. Examples include labor laws, consumer protections, and certain family laws. Courts enforce these rules strictly regardless of contract terms. They reflect the limits of contractual freedom in favor of broader social interests. The next term is descent. Descent in law refers to the transmission of real property or rights through inheritance. In a case when a person dies intestate, that is without a will, statutory rules govern descent to ensure fairness among heirs. Descent contracts with a device which refers to inheritance through a will. Its scope is fundamental in succession law. The next phrase is zero-sum enforcement. Zero-sum enforcement describes legal or contractual enforcement where one party's gain is exactly balanced by another's loss. It is common in competitive litigation or zero-sum contracts. Such enforcement emphasizes adversarial outcomes. Courts may try to mitigate a harshness through equitable remedies. Its scope highlights the win-loss nature of certain legal disputes. The next phrase is zoning hearing officer. Zoning hearing officer is an official who reviews applications, variances or disputes under zoning regulations. They conduct hearings and issue decisions or recommendations. Their role ensures due process in land use matters. Decisions may be appealed to higher planning boards or courts. The scope is crucial in urban planning and development law. The next term is manifest. Manifest in legal law and a commercial context, that is, a manifest is a document listing the contents, passengers or goods carried by a ship, aircraft or vehicle. It serves as proof of carriage and aids customs, taxation and insurance procedures. The accuracy of a manifest is legally significant in liability disputes. False entries can result in penalties or forfeiture. Today, digital manifests streamline complaints with their transport regulations. The next phrase is large-scale dismissal. Large-scale dismissal, also known as mass layoff, occurs when a significant number of employees are terminated simultaneously by an employer. It is often regulated by labor laws requiring notice, consultation with the unions or compensation. Such dismissals usually happens due to restructuring, financial crisis or technological changes. Governments often mandate social protection measures in these cases. The legal framework balances employer flexibility and worker security. The next phrase is parole evidence. The parole evidence rule restricts the use of outside evidence to alter or contradict a written contract. It ensures written agreements remain the definitive record of parties' intentions. Exceptions exist for fraud, mistake, or incomplete terms. Courts apply the rule to maintain contractual certainty. Its scope is central to contract interpretation. The next phrase is why execution notice. A why execution notice likely refers to a specialized or conditional legal notice to enforce a judgment or obligation. Execution notices inform debtors or asset seizure or enforcement steps. The why may denote a specific statutory framework or variant. They ensure transparency in the enforcement process. Such notices protect a due process before coercive action. The next phrase is zoning process. The zoning process is the legal mechanism by which land use is divided into categories like residential, commercial, and industrial. Local governments oversee zoning to balance growth and community welfare. It involves planning, public hearings, and approvals. Zoning affects property values, development rights, and a community design. The process can be amended to adapt to changing needs. The next phrase is wrongful termination. Wrongful termination occurs when an employer unlawfully dismisses an employee in a violation of contract, statute, or public policy. Grounds include discrimination, retaliation, or breach of implied agreements. Remedies often involve restatement of compensation. Wrongful termination claims protect employee rights. Its scope is central in employment and labor law. The next phrase is unexpired lease. Unexpired lease refers to a lease agreement still in effect and not yet terminated by expiration or cancellation. Rights and obligations continue until its end date. Unexpired leases can be transferred, renewed, or enforced in bankruptcy proceedings. Courts recognize them as valuable interests. Their scope is important in property and contract law. The next phrase is unincorporated entity. Unincorporated entity is an organization not formally registered as a corporation, such as partnerships, associations, or clubs. Members may bear personal liability for obligations. These entities lack separate legal personality in many jurisdictions. However, they may still sue to be sued under statutory provisions. Their scope covers business law and community organizations. The next phrase is unlawful enrichment. Unlawful enrichment arises when one party unfairly benefits at another's expense without a legal justification. The law imposes restitution to correct an unjust gain. It is based on principles of equity rather than wrongdoing. Courts order repayment to prevent an unjust advantage. Its scope is significant in civil obligations and a contract law. The next term is writ. Writ is a formal written order issued by a court directing a person or authority to perform or refrain from an act. Writs enforce rights and ensure legal remedies. Examples include habeas corpus, mandamus, and certiorari. Writ jurisdiction is vital in a constitutional and administrative law. Their scope reflects judicial oversight and a protection of rights.